The students of Geography of Development presents a documentary on the challenges of accessing funding for rural development projects. To do this, we will get you affiliated about what it is, then describe general challenges of access to rural funding, after which we'll present a case study, then give our recommendation and examples for future projects, and finally, conclude. To begin, what is a rural area? A rural area is a region that is sparsely populated and primarily consists of agricultural land, forests, and natural resources. They are often characterized by a slower pace of life, close-knit communities, and a strong sense of connection to the land. Rural areas play an important role in providing food and other resources to urban centers. However, some rural areas lack basic facilities such as educational institutes, healthcare facilities, job opportunities, and much more. Next, what is rural development? Rural development is the process of improving the economic, social, and environmental conditions in rural areas. It's important because rural areas are often neglected and left behind in terms of infrastructure, education, healthcare, and job opportunities. Rural development can help to reduce poverty, increase food security, promote sustainable agricultural practices, and create economic opportunities for rural communities. Rural development projects aim to improve the quality of life and economic well-being of people living there, which often face many challenges. Rural development projects are created to strengthen rural institutions that provide services complementary to or supportive of agricultural development as well. There are various sources of funding available at the global, national, and regional levels depending on the objectives and scope of the project. The European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development (EAFRD) is financed by the European Union to contribute to the EU-wide objectives of improving the competitiveness of agriculture and forestry, ensuring the sustainable management of natural resources and climate action, and achieving a balanced territorial development of rural economies and communities. Also, there is the European Network for Rural Development, the ENRD, which is a hub of information on how rural development policies, programs, projects, and other initiatives work in practice and how they can be improved to help rural areas thrive. There are a few sources of funding in the Caribbean for rural development as well. One such source is the World Bank, which has a portfolio in the Caribbean that totals to some US 2.6 billion in the IBRD and IDA, and trust fund financing for 72 projects. Another source is the Special Development Fund of the Caribbean Development Bank, which is the bank's largest pool of concessionary funds used to address poverty and human development challenges throughout the Caribbean region. Contributions to this fund come from all member countries of the CDB, as well as non-members. This documentary will explore the challenges of accessing funding for rural development projects and suggest possible solutions to overcome these challenges. Accessing funding for rural development projects poses a significant challenge to individuals, communities, and organizations in rural areas, as rural development projects are essential in promoting the socio-economic development of rural areas, which have the potential to contribute to the national economy and improve the living standards of people in these areas. Firstly, the lack of financial resources is a significant challenge in accessing funding for rural development projects. Unlike urban areas that have adequate financial resources, rural areas lack sufficient capital to initiate and implement developmental projects. As a result, rural development projects tend to be underfunded or do not take off. Secondly, the complex and lengthy funding application process is another challenge, as the funding application process for rural development projects are complicated and requires considerable amount of time and resources to complete. This makes it difficult for individuals and organizations in rural areas to access the funding. Thirdly, rural areas often lack the infrastructure and capacity to operate and maintain the developed project continuously. This makes it difficult for investors to finance projects knowing that the project will not be sustainable in the long run. Lastly, there needs to be more transparency and accountability in the funding allocation process, as it leads to some areas receiving more funding than others. This then creates an unequal distribution of resources, which negatively affects the socio-economic development of rural communities. Case study: Limpopo, South Africa. People have relocated to the city as a result of the underdevelopment in rural areas, which puts a strain on infrastructure. High rates of unemployment, destitution, criminality, adolescent pregnancies, and the spread of HIV/AIDS all contribute to this. Only 1.3 million people live in Limpopo, which produces 3.8% of South Africa's GDP and has a 30.6% unemployment rate. Due to the terrible droughts which is endangering livestock, people in rural villages are having a difficult time surviving. Poor households are more vulnerable when there is unemployment, and in rural areas, women often take on most of the childcare responsibilities. Even though development projects have made an effort to alleviate the problems of mothers, Limpopo still has high crime rates, which has left the people with a high level of mistrust. As such, rural communities' cohesiveness has suffered. The impoverished poverty that characterizes so many rural villages of Limpopo and the surrounding provinces presents a considerable challenge to South Africa's developmental welfare system in view of its stated purpose of eradicating poverty. The government will continue to promote improving living standards in South Africa by promoting poverty alleviation programs with a particular focus on outlying areas, such as the Limpopo IDC and Grooming Cattle Development Project. However, it is difficult to obtain government funding for community development initiatives. Similar trends have been noted in Transkei, where it was concluded that areas with the lowest level of development and high poverty are more difficult to make successful applications. Few people in rural areas have the education and expertise necessary to judge an organization's legitimacy, making them open to exploitation. Because of ineffective resource management, explicit nepotism, and significant corruption, certain projects have been hindered as a result. Everyone agrees that outside development groups would still be required to support community-based development projects, even if they were to begin from scratch. The majority of people in rural regions lack information and skill necessary to evaluate the organization's legitimacy, making them open to exploitation. Consequently, as a result of inadequate fiscal management, many projects have failed. Another difficulty for funding is the lack of proper educational resources. While 80% of the population is literate, just a little more than a fifth of them have any kind of formal education. This leads to another problem, which is why many rural development initiatives have struggled with poor administration and governance. Projects lack planning, established exit strategies, monitoring, and evaluation, specifically when it comes to employing a top-to-down leadership style, selecting incorrect technology, and not being adequately precise with project objectives, which leads to a lack of focus. Also, in many rural areas, the lack of infrastructure such as roads and electricity makes it difficult to attract investors and development agencies. Political, physical, infrastructural, social, and cultural barriers may also prevent rural development programs from being successful. Another problem is the lack of available finance, as there aren't many funding options for rural development projects in South Africa. The majority of the funding for these initiatives comes from the government. However, it itself has limited resources. Here are some recommendations to access those funds. Firstly, investigating alternative financing resources, such as grants from global organizations, crowdfunding, and private-public partnerships, is one way to deal with the problem of limited financial resources. These platforms offer avenues for funding for rural development projects. Another option is to streamline and simplify the funding application procedure. To achieve this, it is necessary to inform people and organizations in rural areas more thoroughly about the criteria for being eligible and the supporting documentation needed for training and support. Next, to address the issue of sustainability, funding organizations can develop a capacity building program that trains and mentors individuals on how to manage and maintain and develop projects. This will guarantee that the projects developed are feasible and can help the neighborhood in the coming years, as well as attract possible investors. Lastly, to guarantee a less challenging, fair, and equal distribution of resources to all rural areas, the funding allocation process needs to be more accountable, open, and transparent. This can be accomplished by making the funding allocation available for stakeholders' scrutiny. Case study: India. The Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana is a rural development project in India that aims to provide all-weather road connectivity to unconnected habitations in rural areas. The program, which started in 2000, has successfully connected numerous villages, improving access to markets, healthcare, and education for local residents. Community participation is a key aspect of the PMGSY, ensuring that the roads meet the needs of the communities and are properly maintained. The program also emphasizes quality, following strict guidelines for materials and designs and construction methods. The PMGSY has contributed to poverty reduction and raising living standards and promoted economic growth in rural areas. Similarly, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act (NREGA), launched in 2005, provides 100 days of wage employment per year to rural households engaged in skilled manual labor. It empowers rural communities, involves them in the planning and implementation process, and emphasizes transparency and accountability. The program has significantly reduced poverty rates, improved living standards, and stimulated economic growth in rural areas. Both the PMGSY and NREGA have been successful in addressing the development needs of rural India through community involvement, quality focus, poverty alleviation efforts, and most importantly, better access to funding. In conclusion, securing funding for rural development projects is a challenging task that requires collaboration among various stakeholders. Efforts should be made to address financial, administrative, operational, and social obstacles in order to promote socio-economic development in rural areas. The success of rural development initiatives in India has been promising, with projects demonstrating positive outcomes such as increased agricultural productivity and improved rural livelihoods. Rural development is a complex process involving governments, NGOs, the private sector, and local communities, all of whom must work together to create a sustainable and equitable future. Overcoming challenges such as limited funding, inadequate infrastructure, and essential services is crucial. Investing in education, healthcare, and other vital services, as well as promoting sustainable practices, can help rural communities thrive while ensuring long-term environmental sustainability. Ultimately, rural development aims to create a more just and equitable world where everyone has equal access to resources and opportunities for a fulfilling life. Thank you for your time. We look forward for your comments.